legalizefreedom.com.
Good evening. I'm Greg Moffat of legalizefreedom.com. That's legalize-freedom.com. And this evening I want to ponder the question, David Icke, is he right? Now, most of you watching this will know exactly who David Icke is. For those of you who don't, just go and do some research and you'll find out very quickly. As with most people, particularly of my generation, David Icke came to my attention, as he did many millions of people, particularly in the UK, as a sports broadcaster, predominantly on television. He worked throughout most of the 1980s. He actually had an early career as a professional footballer, but he developed arthritis very early in his life, and that basically curtailed his career severely. But Icke was a well-known face on television, even if you didn't watch sports, which I didn't, but he was there just before the news or just after the news. It's nuts. Over to David Icke. And he was a good-looking guy, and he was good on screen, and he was very passionate about his subject. So he was a success in television for as long as it lasted. At some point towards the end of the 1980s, things began to change for him in a big way. And he underwent what can only be described as a personal transformation at a very profound level. And he's the archetypal example of someone who has undergone what I call transformation through trauma. Basically, something deeply difficult occurs, and this doesn't have to be, and often isn't, a physical event, like an accident or an illness or a bereavement or anything like that, but something on a spiritual level or a psychological level which completely changes someone. And that obviously happened to him. He abandoned his media career and joined the Green Party in the UK, became a spokesman for them, and was successful at that for a while, because again, he had everything that was required to be good with the media. So he was an ideal candidate for that. That experience didn't last too long, only a couple of years really, because his transformation continued, and he obviously had to make a big change in his life, but joining the Green Party just was not it. I was drawn to him as soon as his TV career ended and the rest of his life started to unfold. I was sort of drawn to him because he seemed to be someone like myself that apparently intuited quite early on that there was something wrong with the world, or if not wrong as such, that we were misapprehending reality in a fundamental way, and that the modern scientific materialist reductionist way of looking at the world was very, very incomplete. It's a little bit like Morpheus says in The Matrix when he's speaking with Neo at their introductory meeting. He's talking to Neo, saying, "I know how you feel, and it's like this, isn't it?" So it was something a bit like that. And Icke was clearly struggling with major existential issues. He got involved with alternative health around this time as well, because of course he was failing to find satisfactory treatment for his arthritis, and that tied in with his Green Party phase. And from Green he went to Turquoise in 1991. Was the beginning of what we call his Turquoise phase. He still refers to it somewhat jokingly as that. And it was in 1991, most notoriously, that Icke appeared on the Wogan show. This was a light-hearted, or it was early evening, so you were never going to get into anything too heavy, but fairly light-hearted chat show hosted by an Irish broadcaster called Terry Wogan, who, aside from his show, was probably most famous in this country anyway, as the host for the UK coverage of the Eurovision Song Contest. Wogan was a likeable figure. I used to enjoy listening to him interview other, his guests, and he was a good interviewer, but it was this notorious interview that really changed David Icke's life. because Wogan was completely dismissive of him, very derisory, thought he was a complete lunatic, and basically said so. He humiliated David Icke in front of millions of people. And Icke later said that this set him free. That experience was one of his deepest fears, perhaps his deepest childhood fear, was being humiliated in public, as it is for all of us, I think. And this happened to him on national television. And of course, in the modern media age, that clip has been played and replayed millions of times. So David Icke's humiliation lives on in the media matrix. He attempted to set out in this interview some of the basic tenets of his emerging worldview, how he thought reality was different from that which the rest of us, or most of the rest of us, perceive. But it didn't come across well because it wasn't fully formed. I think Icke has said himself that it was probably a mistake to go on the show at that time, because he was developing. He was in the midst of an existential crisis, and it's probably not the time to go on a lighthearted chat show. But what really came across was he was trying to articulate the imbalance in the world, and I think that's whatever your worldview is, whether it's purely materialist or whether you've got some sort of other deeper metaphysics. The world is very, very much in an imbalanced state, and that's what he was really trying to get across. The single biggest takeaway from the Wogan interview in '91 was, of course, that people claimed that he came on television and said he was the son of God. And that was Wogan's phrase, not Icke's. Icke had previously said that we were all children of a Godhead, which fits in with the worldview that he's later developed, and which has come to be quite accepted in philosophical and metaphysical circles. That is to say that there is one underlying unity in creation and reality in the universe, and we are individuated parts of it, individuated units of consciousness, but we're just not fully aware of it. We are somewhat in, our deepest recesses of our psyche, but we don't understand it. So that's what he was essentially trying to articulate. I first encountered Icke in person in 1993. It might have been early 94, but I think it was 1993. And he came to do a talk. He was doing lecture circuit around the UK at that time, at the university I was attending. And I didn't meet him personally, but I was in the same space as him. And he gave the talk in the concert hall of the music department. And I was studying at the music department. Now, he gave the talk in the evening when there were no lectures on, everybody had gone home, apart from the staff, of course, who were in to look after the audience and keep the building open for his talk to take place. But a few of us came in out of curiosity, because this was the turquoise lunatic from the Wogan show. This is going to be a car crash, let's go along. I felt vaguely uneasy about this, but the others, in my class group, they wanted to go along, but we weren't going to attend the lecture as such. Above the lecture hall in the electronic music department were what we referred to as our labs, one of which was a fully fitted professional recording studio. Downstairs in the concert hall, there were microphones permanently set up, because quite often they'd record concerts, and you don't want to have to set that up every time. So we had a audio feed that we could pull up in the studio from the concert hall, which we did, and we listened to a lot of his talk, and I don't really remember anything about it, but one of the other guys, it was a DJ, he pulled up some, I don't know whether it was dance or dub or house, he pulled up an electronic music track on the desk and mixed Icke's voice stream in with it, and that's something that's actually very common now on YouTube, so we might have perhaps pioneered a trend there, I don't know. Now, Icke had already published quite a few books at this point, including a couple setting out his conspiratorial, controversial view of world events and reality itself. But it was in '94 that the Robots Rebellion book came out, and that is still very much, I think, the main starting point of what quickly solidified into his worldview. I bought a couple of his books. I've got them here, actually. They're massive. We've got The Biggest Secret here, which I believe is from 1998. I mean, you see it's absolutely huge. It's like a telephone directory. That's pretty good. That sets out, basically, it's like, what does David Icke believe? For its time, this is pretty much everything you need. And then I didn't buy another one until 2007, I think, the David Icke Guide to the Global Conspiracy and How to End It. As you can see, that's also huge. I only own these two because I don't really feel that I need more than that. His books tend to be repetitive, and I think each time he writes a book, he tries to incorporate almost everything from the previous book into it. But those are two good starting points if you want to delve into Icke's view of reality. Now, it's a vast cliche, to say the least, to state that 9/11 changed everything. And of course, Icke's book, The Biggest Secret, written several years before that. Now, of course, he was going to incorporate the 9/11 events into his worldview and to have his take on them. But one thing that was very clear was that after 9/11, I found this to be the case with myself. I definitely found it to be a consciousness-altering event. I was not wholly the same person after that as I was before. And what I witnessed was that, not just with David Icke, but he's the subject of this talk, they themselves found a much more ready audience for their ideas, because people are looking for answers. And some people will say, well, Icke's not providing any answers. But what did change, that even amongst all the stuff that many people find difficult with Icke's material, I'm talking about the reptilian stuff and the elite bloodlines and the cabal and the Illuminati and alien intervention, Anunnaki, archons, all of that stuff. What they did see after 9/11, which tied in with David Icke's predictions, was this control grid working its way more into, weaving its tentacles into our everyday lives, into wider society around most of the world. And as I've mentioned in previous videos, we are living with a lot of security measures now that were enacted after 9/11 for, apparently short-term measures needed to deal with this existential threat from the Middle East. And we're still living with them now. So a lot more people started to ask questions of themselves and of their beliefs, their view of the world. And when they did come across people like David Icke, they gave them a little bit more time, and they saw a little bit more in what they were saying that appeared to be manifesting in the 3D so-called real world that most people concern themselves with primarily and take to be all there is. Icke went back on the Wogan show in 2006, and ostensibly it was to be, Wogan was going to be looking back on the original interview, but also basically apologizing to Icke because of the way he treated him. And when you watch the clip, which you can easily find on YouTube, there is a conciliatory tone, no question about it. And Wogan says that was a bit strong, I'm sorry about that. The intent wasn't to humiliate you. But it quickly degenerates. And Icke, without a shadow of a doubt, owns Wogan in that clip, which you cannot say remotely when you look at the original interview from 91. And he does have the last laugh on that. But even then, Wogan shows his true colours, because by the end of it, he's basically trying to shut Icke down, just to shut him up, which was kind of the whole point of the original interview. And when he was interviewed on someone else's chat show, not long after that, Richard and Judy, which was a popular show here in the UK for a while, he called Icke a fundamentalist. So that basically shows you what he really thought. So I don't know whether it was his idea to have Icke back on the show, or whether someone thought that it was a good idea. It was part of a series where Wogan went back over previous guests, and I suppose that was the most notorious one. In 2006, another thing happened, was that mainstream UK television, I can't recall exactly which channel now, they made a documentary called David Icke, Was He Right?, which is where I've kind of aborted and adapted the title for this. And that was another acknowledgement, and it would particularly, that wouldn't have been made prior to 9/11. It was another acknowledgement of what David Icke's talking about in terms of control on our lives, freedoms being limited, freedoms being removed in the name of safety and security. These are ongoing trends. They're happening right before our eyes. There's no doubt about it. So it's a sort of fairly neutral documentary, but the title alone concedes quite a lot to Icke. The next time I ran into David Icke in person was in 2008, a couple of years later, and he actually ran for Parliament in the UK. And he did that in an East Yorkshire constituency of an MP called David Davis, Conservative MP, who has always been a sort of more libertarian type conservative and talks a lot about freedom, about, people should basically be allowed to live free of government control as much as possible, and government are there to facilitate certain things, but really they need to keep their paws out of your business. And Icke called him out on this because he thought Davis talked a good game but didn't put his money where his mouth is. So I went down to a talk that Icke gave in this constituency, and it was a very good talk, actually. Like all of his talks, probably a bit too long. But I went up to him afterwards and had a conversation, and that kind of confirmed my intuition that, Icke is not crazy. Whatever you think about, even if you think some of his ideas are, I don't even like using the word crazy because that's the easy mainstream way to dismiss ideas that you don't like. But even if you think they're very outlandish, I thought this guy is not mentally ill. He absolutely is sane as the day is long. Even if you find that a bit tough to believe. In 2013, an opportunity came up to actually work with David Icke. He crowdfunded a media platform called The People's Voice. This was to be a television channel run out of Wembley in London, and he put out a call on his website, which I was an occasional visitor to. That's how I found out about this. But the word went round, and he was looking for people to take part in this. And I thought to myself, well, however this turns out, this is just too interesting not to get involved in if I can. So I did. I went down and had a series of conversations with his team and also with the man himself, and I ended up working with David's son Gareth on a music show called The Band, and it was a great deal of fun. But the takeaway from that, again, is I actually had a chance to talk to David Icke on numerous occasions, not particularly at length, but to have one-on-one conversations that confirmed everything I thought about them. This is a guy who sees the direction of travel in the world, doesn't like it, and he wants to get other people to consider this view and maybe do something about it. And again, his background to this is archons, elite families, Illuminati, reptilians, the moon being an artificial construct, the rings of Saturn beaming signals down on Earth to control us. All very interesting. Is there something to it? How do we verify that? But that shouldn't detract from his basic message. Now today, of course, there's a lot of researchers and writers who are talking about civil liberty concerns, freedom limiting legislation coming in, ever increasing control and limitation on our lives, and doing it without any deeper philosophical or existential background or support. No need for any of that. And David Icke has played a big part in that. So I firmly believe that. There's a lot of people who, how can I put it, got their start with David Icke and then maybe picked up on one bit or piece of what he was about and went with it. He calls himself the dot connector. And for me, having been to one of his lectures, I think it was something like 8 hours or something like that, absolutely exhausting marathon. I don't know how he does it. It was enough to just sit through it as a member of the audience. And I admire his attempt to kind of prove literally the underlying truth of the universe, which is that everything is connected and everything depends on everything else. It does. I just find it a bit problematic when you try to do that in terms of a very literal reading of events. And I think that's sometimes where he has lost people over the years, because it's he gives such a massive gestalt download of his cosmology that it's very difficult to integrate in one sitting. And although a lot of people who have attended his lectures over the years, some of these have taken place in arenas, very large audiences. Many of them are somewhat familiar with this topic, but many are not. They're brought along by friends and family, and I think they're left utterly bewildered and disorientated. And the instinct, I think, is to reject everything he's saying out of hand and not consider the points that appear to have very, very real bearing on people's everyday lives. Some people have speculated that his reptilian analogies are allegory, that he's not really speaking about literal reptilians. He denies that. One of his other catchphrases is problem, reaction, solution. And again, some people have dismissed his interpretation of that as a misinterpretation of the, amongst other things, Hegelian dialectic. But I think that's something, I mean, you look at history, whether it's from false flags right through the whole gamut of black ops, you can very clearly see many incidents historically, and they keep happening, of governments or other organizations, of military, basically creating problems so that they can, or situations, so that they can then offer a solution. There was no problem, so they have to create one. They offer that a solution, which turns out to be a system, or whatever it happens to be, that they thought they would like to implement in the first place, but they couldn't get it done. How do you have, or what's an easier way to get almost complete control over people's daily lives? What they do, what they have, where they can go, to monitor them. It's much easier if you've got a reason to do it, a very clear reason, one that almost can't be argued with. And we saw a lot of that in the wake of 9/11. Whatever you think about the causes of it, doesn't matter. We're seeing a hell of a lot of that now in the wake of of COVID-19. And again, it doesn't matter what you think about the origins of it. What the action is in what's happening on the ground, what's happening in your daily life. Totalitarian tiptoe is another one of Icke's phrases. And again, I think, as with problem, reaction, solution, it's very easy to dismiss that as because it's not all happening at once, because we're not going from more or less unlimited freedom to like almost no freedom at all overnight, doesn't mean it's not happening. I think his phrase neatly sums up how little by little, piece by piece, we are forced to give things up, or asked to give things up, have things taken away, or don't have things that we would like to have. Because, well, it's just this little thing. If we just do this, then everything will be all right. And it's, here's something we didn't foresee. Well, now you did that other thing. So if we just do this little thing, and then it'll all be fine. And maybe it is for a while. And it's like, that wasn't quite enough. But if we do 10% more of this, then it'll be okay. And then, obviously we know where that ends up. And that's very much what we're seeing now. What I would characterize what we're tiptoeing into is a technocracy. And if you see some of my other videos on the coronavirus crisis, I'll explain this a little bit more. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's just a way of organizing a society or organizing a government that seems to be increasingly the direction of travel. Aldous Huxley, author of Brave New World, there's a few talks that he gave back in the day. These are available again online, the audio of them. And he talks about scientific dictatorship. And that's basically what technocracy is. It's the world envisaged by the Zeitgeist movement. Basically, it's government by people who know how to run your life better than you do. And by the way, that's not a matter of opinion, and there is no alternative. We're doing it this way. And that's that. I've seen a few comments recently on social media, and they were people responding to people like myself making these sorts of points, having these sort of concerns about where we're headed. And the general tone, I'll paraphrase, has been, if you think you're having your freedoms, freedoms in air quotes, stolen, if you think you're losing your rights, air quotes, then you need to defriend me. You need to get out of here, because it's not happening. It's crazy. You use dangerous talk. You say you feel less free than you did a year ago. That's dangerous talk. You need to stop that, conspiracy theorist. Okay, well, if you can't travel, if you can't visit your family, if you can't get married, if you can't work, and you're just told you can do none of these things on penalty of fines and ultimately imprisonment, well, what do you call that? I call it loss of freedom. And some things that were rights before that have now been suspended or curtailed or threatened to be removed altogether, I call it a loss of freedom. I call it a loss of rights. So, yeah, because that's what it is. If it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's a duck. At the end of the day, all said and done, what I think Icke intuited himself and what he's increasingly articulating is a worldview, a cosmology that fits with contemporary sciences that I've explored extensively in my work, which is that consciousness is fundamental and that time and space are not exactly illusions, but they're not fundamental. Time and space exist within consciousness, not the other way around. So his basic intuitions of the nature of reality, I think, are correct. All the stuff that people are unsure about, reptilian bloodlines, whatnot, maybe we'll find out in due course. But if it's not allegory for him, a lot of what he says certainly works effectively as allegory for what we see in the real world. Certainly his work exposing corruption at many levels of society and the problem we have, the massive, largely unacknowledged problem we have with child abuse, with ritual child abuse, paedophilia. He's called that many times, been heavily criticised and castigated for it. But when you get flack, you're over the target. I recommend a couple of books by another radio guest of mine, Jason Horsley. He's written a lot about ritual abuse. Two of his books in particular, Vice of Kings, and the one prior to that, Prisoner of Infinity. Get these books. Prisoner of Infinity in particular is like nothing else I've read. It really isn't. It's a life changer. So I recommend that. But yeah, Icke has explored this extensively and caught flack for it. Needless to say, I've already talked about what's going on currently with the coronavirus crisis, and Icke has been there on the front line, like 9/11, taking what's happening now and slotting into his worldview and vice versa and saying, I told you so. And again, he's been shot down in flames for it. And again, other people have been saying, oh, hang on a minute. He did say this, in 1991. He did say that if we're not careful, this is where we'll end up. And that's increasingly happening. And of course, for every person kind of having this kind of, oh, hang on a minute moment, there's another person who is undergoing massive cognitive dissonance because what they're being told from their usual sources of information about the world doesn't match up with what they're experiencing. And that's a very uncomfortable feeling. And that has to be stamped out at all costs, even if it's the cost of their own sanity. Last year, in 2019, there was another documentary made about David Icke called Renegade. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily pro-Icke, but it's more from his point of view. It's less objective, I suppose. But that's something else that's worth checking out. It might be a good place to start as it's so recent. Again, if you don't want to read one of those enormous books, maybe check out the documentary. Icke has also talked a lot about 5G. Now, this is not something I've researched extensively. I know about it, of course. And I understand that electromagnetic radiation can be very damaging to carbon-based life forms. If you want to check out his views on that, I would say, and there's certainly a lot to think about, no matter what your initial reaction is to the 5G quote-unquote conspiracy theory. Again, I don't have a fully formed opinion on this because I've not looked at it, and I think that if we are to have fully formed opinions about these things, then we need to look at the issues ourselves. But Icke did a series of interviews on London Rail That's London Real, R-E-A-L, not real, double E. That's my accent. I can't remember the name. Brian Rose? I think it's something like that. Anyway, he's Mr. London Real. So you can check out those. Now, those were instantly taken down from all social media and platforms and YouTube and whatnot. And Icke himself, of course, has recently been extensively deplatformed. YouTube gone, Facebook gone, and more recently Twitter, all gone. He's got his own website, of course, davidicke.com. But when you're over the target, get the flack. He has been mainly criticised for spreading disinformation, and that any alternative view to the mainstream view of whatever it happens to be, from 9/11 to COVID-19 to 5G, any alternative view is dangerous or potentially dangerous. Well, it is. But again, life's dangerous. We have to be able to do our own risk assessments. And I think constantly wrapping people in cotton wool and not allowing them to learn through their mistakes, however costly, is ultimately a mistake. And it's something that doesn't have a future unless you find a way of just making questioning anything completely impossible. He's always been a very good speaker, and this will be his media experience. And in the London Unite for Freedom rally on August 29th, he did a really good rousing speech, whatever you think of the content. That's available on YouTube. That's worth having a look at. One thing he said towards the end of that speech, which he said many times, your children will have to live with this. And what he's referring to, of course, is if there is a totalitarian tiptoe into a technocracy, a global fascist state, whatever phrases he uses, whatever you want to call it, then those of you who go along to get along now, your children will have to live with it. And the essential takeaway from that is he's literally correct. And I think that too many of us can't think beyond the end of the week or the end of the month, never mind the end of our own lives, because we never really think we're going to die. And I think if we thought more about those who come after us, as previous generations were more accustomed to doing, I think we'd be a lot better off. Control is ultimately what it's all about. It's what Icke's been talking about all his life. It's a huge part of what I and many others have been talking about. Control over our lives by forces, as far as this material life is concerned, our incarnation in this form, certainly control by forces outside of us. Some people would say, well, you're ultimately in control, whatever it happens to be. But in this sort of dream that we're all sharing, it really is about control over the thought, action, perception. And to say that, I think that's Icke's bottom line, as it is with mine. It's a case of don't shoot the messenger, really. A lot of people, as I said, as his basic thesis and his worldview has begun to tick more boxes in people's everyday lives, as I said, either you become more open to it or you shut it down. One way to do that, of course, is to shoot the messenger and shut them down. Put your fingers in your ears and your head in the sand. And I think he's essentially correct about our way out of this, which is a recognition that we are all connected, that everything's connected, everything depends on everything else. And it's a misapprehension of what we are, where we are, the nature of reality, our connection to each other, our connection to the wider planet, connection to the cosmos, the nature of life and death has brought us to this terrible place that we're entering now. And Icke is at least correct, fundamentally, in his own way, about our way out of all that. So to answer my basic question that I set out at the start, David Icke, is he right? My initial reaction would be, it depends. But if you want a straight answer, if there's only a choice of one, a tick box, multiple choice question, yes or no, then the answer is yes, he's right. So you can find more content on all of these topics, as I mentioned at the top of the hour, legalizefreedom.com, legalized-freedom.com. I've got an all new website at the moment, so head over on and check that out. You've got over 300 interviews, most of them available absolutely free. And if you feel so inclined, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. It makes content more visible to more people going forward. So until next time, I'm Greg Moffat, and you've been listening to legalizefreedom.com.
legalizefreedom.com